Reach the president's desk shortly after. Straight to the Capitol Hill now. Phil Mattingly is there. He has been pulling some long hours, and he's following it all for us. Hello, Phil. What's happening at this hour?
Well, the Senate's starting to move their debate, kind of starting to get the point where they're actually closing that debate up right now. Don, look, this result is a foregone conclusion. We know Republicans have the votes. However, the process is going to take a little bit longer than they expected. As you remember, the House passed the tax bill 227 to 203 earlier today. The Senate was supposed to pass the bill and then send it straight to the president's desk. Big signing ceremony planned for Wednesday. There was one holdup because of the Senate rules that this process is moving through, allowing Republicans to pass this on a simple majority vote. Those rules found that something in the Senate Republican bill actually ran afoul. And because of that, two minor technical provisions are being stripped out. That means it will have to be sent back to the House. Don, I know you want me to go in deep detail about Senate budget reconciliation rules, but to give kind of a short summary of what's going on right now, this doesn't endanger the bill. Republicans are still in position to get this to the president's desk tomorrow. It's just going to take a little bit longer. And if you look at the grand scheme of things here, Republicans about to do something that hasn't been done in 31 years, an overhaul of the tax code, one they're doing in a partisan manner. No Democrats are supporting this. Democrats repeatedly coming to the floor over the course of the last couple of hours to attack this bill, say it doesn't go far enough to help the middle class, say it's too slanted towards the corporate side of things. But that hasn't stopped Republicans not just from being on the verge of passing this, Don, but on the verge of passing this with every single member of the Republican conference who's present voting yes.
And Phil Mattingly will be covering it all. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I want to bring in now Mark McKinnon. He is a former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain and the executive producer of Showtime's The Circus. He's here for our fireside chat this evening. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Listen, I want you to listen to just two different takes on today's news. Watch this.
This promise being kept today is one of the most important things we could do to get the U.S. economy growing faster, to help people get bigger paychecks, to have a fairer tax system, and to simplify the system so people can have more peace of mind.
This tax bill will be an anchor around the ankles of every Republican. If they haven't learned it yet, they're going to learn it next November. Republicans will rue the day they pass this bill, and the American people will never let them forget it.
Okay, so you heard what Paul Ryan said, but the opponents of this are saying trickle down never works. It never works. So who's right? Will Republicans ride this bill to success in 2018, or will they rue the day?
Well, I think that's what you'd expect from the leadership both of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and the answer probably lies somewhere in between. There's valid criticism for sure about the bill, which is it was pushed through on a partisan basis, no Democrats. The Congressional Budget Office says it'll add $1.5 trillion to the deficit, which is kind of an odd approach for Republicans, not typical. A lot of special interest components to it, which there isn't any tax bill, like the ridiculous carried interest provision. And it's a perception problem for Donald Trump because he said originally it wouldn't be good for him. It clearly is good for him. But at the end of the day, this is a very, very important win for Donald Trump and the Republicans, a legislative win that they needed badly. Now, I think that the answer to what this will be, let's have this show a year from now and we'll see how it worked out. But the fact is that the economy is growing at a very good clip right now. And it came in at 1.9. Donald Trump it's now at about 3% or more with Donald Trump. So that's a 50% growth rate for Donald Trump. If this gives confidence to more businesses to hire more, spend more, put more money in wages and paychecks, and people have more confidence, that'll be a big deal, and in the end, a success if that's the case.
Well, let me ask you, how did Republicans manage to make a tax cut unpopular? 33% of Americans support this Republican tax bill.
Well, great question, but I think that your colleague John King hit it earlier today when he said that, listen, with the perception and the distrust of Congress today, Congress could pass a bill giving everybody an apple pie, and suddenly there would be, people would be feeling very bad about apple pies. They would have an unfavorable opinion about apple pies. But the fact is the Congress itself is unpopular. People don't trust the Congress. They also just generally don't trust tax bills. Nobody thinks they're ever going to get a tax cut. So the interesting thing about some of your polling is that they say it's a very unpopular tax bill. Well, only 17% of the respondents think they're going to get a tax cut, when in reality, 80% will. Mm-hmm. So when those facts line up, which they will presumably do over time, and people realize, say, oh, well, actually, I did get a tax cut, I think that the perception about the tax bill may change over time.
But the tax cuts for the middle class are not permanent. They're temporary. They're based on a timeline.
But that's true, Don. But it is Ryan's goal, and I think everybody else's, to make them permanent. And one thing I'm certain of is that when that comes up, it'll be very hard, including for any Democrat, to vote against extending those, because it's one thing to give people a tax cut, but to take it away is very, very difficult and not often done in Congress.
It's like the same
so
thing
I think
that
they'll be made permanent at some point.
It's the same thing we've been discussing with health care. Once you get it, you expect it and you want it, right? And someone tries to take it away.
Hard to take it away. Very hard to take it away. So I think they'll be made permanent over time.
Let me put this up. This is according to a nonpartisan tax policy center. It came out today. It says you can see that the richer are going to get the bigger tax cut here. You get both in dollar amounts and in a percentage of your income, and a percent of your income. Could you blame someone in the middle class for wondering why rich people get more money and a higher tax cut under this plan, Mark?
No, not at all. And I think that's what a result that you get when you run things through, and it's not bipartisan. And I think I think Republicans were so anxious to get a short-term win, to just get a legislative victory, that they didn't really understand the ramifications of the long-term impact of how Democrats are going to be able to attack this bill in precisely that way, to say that it did more for the rich than it did for the middle class. Now, that's a debate that we'll have, and in the long run, we'll see what happens to the confidence for businesses, whether those wages come down, whether people spend more, whether they feel good and confident about the economy, and if they do, and if there's substantial growth, that's going to take care of a lot of problems over time.
Well, it's interesting.
That's a big if,
listen,
too.
You're a Republican, but you're also a sensible Republican. Why aren't people out talking about the tax bill the way you are? And why won't Republicans just say, or at least the ones who are supporting this bill, just say, listen, we need a win, so work with us on this one?
Well, listen, I think I think what voters want is just some candor and authenticity, and it baffles me sometimes the extent to which people will do gyrations to try and spin something when it's obviously something completely different. Yeah. Listen, Republicans are making a big bet that by giving money to corporations and to other well-off interests, that they're going to increase wages, and it's the old trickle down. And you know, we've done this experiment before with mixed results, but you know, this is Trump's turn, and he's got to win. The Republicans are in control of Congress, and we're now seeing the result of what happens when Republicans are in control. They have the executive, and they got their W on the board, which is what they needed before the end of the year.
So let's talk about this. You said it's because of how people feel about Congress, right? That Congress is unpopular. Anytime you deal with taxes, that's going to be unpopular. But also part of it has to do with the president's unpopularity as well, because a new CNN poll shows the president is at just 35%, the lowest he's ever been in our polling. Why does a president with a booming stock market, a strong economy, he's going to have a win when it comes to taxes, why does he have numbers that are so bad?
Well, I think a lot of it just has to do with the chaos, Don. I think that people have seen a chaotic presidency. Oh, sure. It's rhetoric, and it's been designed, and he's been communicating to his core basic constituencies, not broadly to the middle or to Democrats. And people feel like he's been very partisan, that he's attacked everybody across the board except for his base, and that he hasn't governed in a way that people are used to seeing presidents do. This has been a very concerted, based strategy by Donald Trump. And and he suffered for it. But listen. The thing that strikes me about the poll is that his favorable ratings are so disconnected from the economy. Normally, we see those numbers are very close parallel. In other words, if people feel a 50% confidence in the economy and the way things are going, that's generally how they feel about the president. So that shows just how much of a problem President Trump has personally when he's so disconnected from economic numbers, which are so much better.
Yeah, and with the stock market and everything booming, he ends his first year with lower poll numbers than any president in the first year of office. I mean, he is historically unpopular by any measure. The question is, what's in store for year two? Because in year two, that's an election year. That's a midterm year.
Well, it is an election year, and as I've sort of been alluding to, if the economy is booming and wages are up and people are feeling good, that's going to make up for a lot of problems. So, and I think it's an opportunity, too. Now that he's got this kind of W on the board, he's got to win, and he likes winning. We know that. I think if he can go to infrastructure, which is something that Democrats like, And I've argued for a long time that Donald Trump may be the only president that could get a big infrastructure bill done, because a typical Republican president would never spend as much money that will be required, and Democrats would never vote for, and if it were a Democratic president, Republicans would never vote for it. So you could argue, and I do, that Donald Trump could be the only president that could get a massive infrastructure bill done. And in doing so, this would be an opportunity for him to reach out to Democrats. If he could get a big infrastructure bill done with a good economy on the back of it, that could help.
Do you think that Democrats will ever work with this president, because they seem really averse to working with this president?
Great question, Don. I think that's a consequence of how he came out of the gate. In other words, I would have argued strategically to do infrastructure out of the gate. Do some like my whole boss George W. Bush did on education. Find an issue you can get together with Democrats early on in the administration, because by doing it the way that he did it, I think Democrats felt burned early on and just said, we're never going to help this guy. So that may be the case going forward on infrastructure. On the other hand, I think the Democrats also want to go home and show results. And infrastructure is something that Democrats just love.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility there.
I always enjoy our conversations. Thank you, Mark McKinnon. I appreciate it. If I don't see you, Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you. When we come back, the president's son slamming the Russia investigation and using his comments to blast a number one enemy of the Trump White House, and that's Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump Jr. railing against the Russia investigation tonight. The president's son blasting Robert Mueller's team and complaining about having to testify about that infamous Trump Tower meeting with Russians. Let's discuss now with Congressman Eric Swalwell, a Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. Good evening, sir. Good to have you.
Hey, Don. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, sir. Donald Trump Jr. spoke to a gathering of conservative college students tonight. I want you to take a listen. This is a portion of what he had to say.
As Charlie alluded to earlier, I have now spent 23 hours testifying about a 20-minute meeting. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, spent 11 hours testifying about Benghazi. All right, think about it. About Benghazi, where she was the Secretary of State, where people died, and she lied about it, saying it was because of a YouTube video.
Well, some of those 23 hours of testimony would have been in front of you at the House Intel Committee, right?
That's right, Don. And, it's actually quite shocking to hear him talk about our interview and say something other than a father-son privilege that he made up. So, I welcome him talking, because there was a lot that we wanted to hear from him that he wouldn't tell us, because he invoked this privileged privilege, as we would call it.
Yeah. Just a little bit ago, FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe wrapped up a meeting with the House Intel Committee after being questioned for 8 hours. McCabe has come under fire from Republicans for his wife's ties to Clinton ally Terry McAuliffe, and his name having come up in text messages between the FBI agents that were removed from Special Counsel Mueller's team. Where do you stand on McCabe's performance, and can you tell us anything about today's meeting?
Well, I can't, Don, but what I can tell you from what I have learned on the House Judiciary Committee is that Bob Mueller and the FBI team made the right call when an agent's work was called into question, because he had demonstrated a perceived bias, and that agent was immediately removed from the investigation. Now, compare that, Don, to President Trump. He learned that his National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, had lied to the FBI, and he kept him on as long as he possibly could until it was made public by the Washington Post. For over 18 days he stayed on, and then finally, when it became a public relations problem, he was fired. This team, Bob Mueller and the professionals around him, they heard about a perceived bias, and the agent was removed. That's what you do when you have an issue with someone on your team. Not what you do is what Donald Trump did with Michael Flynn. So I'll take the Mueller team any day over what we've seen out of the White House.
Well, the president's legal team wrote a letter to Congress complaining about Mueller's team acquiring emails from Trump's transition team. The Mueller team is pushing back, releasing a statement essentially saying, not so fast, these emails were acquired legally. What's your read on this situation?
Right, and we're talking about public emails. They're objecting that Bob Mueller accessed transition team emails on a .gov email account where there's no expectation of privacy, just as the FBI agents didn't have an expectation of privacy when they were talking on their work phones. and their text messages were released to the media the night before Rob Rosenstein testified to the House Judiciary Committee. The transition team's emails are being reviewed by Bob Mueller, and for even better reason than anything that's come before it, which is that they may have been working with the Russians, which is under investigation. So I don't think that's going to stand up as a legal argument or keep them from being admissible if they have to be in court.
Congressman, I want you to take a listen to this. This is from an interview with Chris Christie. He did it on MSNBC earlier. Watch this.
He deserves the scrutiny. You know why? Because he was involved in the transition and involved in meetings that call into question his role.
Is that just bad blood between Christie and the Kushners, or does Christie have a point there?
No, he has a point. It's not just Jared Kushner's involvement in the transition. It's that he also attended that June 9th meeting, that he met with sanctioned Russian bankers during the time of the transition. And so there's a lot of questions about the relationships that Jared Kushner had that he did not disclose and only acknowledged once press reporting or our investigation were able to expose them. So I think what you've seen, these aren't coincidences, Don. You've seen a multiplicity of family members, campaign team members, and administration members having contacts with the Russians, not disclosing them, and then being confronted with them and minimally acknowledging them. And so, this is a pattern here that the public needs to know about to find out, what do the Russians have on President Trump? Why does he treat them so favorably?
The question is, though, Chris Christie could have answered that question a number of ways. He could have deflected. Why do you think he's talking about this? And obviously he answered a question someone asked him, but why is he discussing this? Why did he answer that way?
I don't know, Don. I hope he's just being candid, as he's been known to be from time to time. Sometimes the Democrats like it, sometimes we don't. Here, I'll just tell you, his assessment matches up with, I think, a objective assessment of what Mr. Kushner's role was during the transition, which was troublesome and worthy of scrutiny.
Yeah. The president has insisted a number of times that he's not going to fire Robert Mueller, but his allies in Congress and his allies in the media have been working overtime to discredit Mueller's investigation. Does that risk tainting any findings that the Mueller investigation may come up with?
Well, first, I think firing Bob Mueller would be obstruction of justice. Clearly, it would also pulverize the team's investigation and set it back. And the best thing we can do is to put that in stone by having bipartisan legislation to protect Mueller. But, Don, it's not just the president's wishes to get rid of Mueller. It's what we're hearing from conservative voices in media. It's what my colleagues on the House Judiciary Committee are saying. I've always thought, would be the best deterrent, because obstruction of justice would be referred to us. But I think right now, if you listen to Republicans on the committee, they take credit for it based on what they've said to FBI Director Wray and Rob Rosenstein. So I'm very concerned, but it's the public sentiment, I think, that hopefully wins the day, and the public is largely behind Bob Mueller and an independent investigation.
As you know, the president released his national security strategy yesterday, and a portion of it reads this. He said, today actors such as Russia are using information tools in an attempt to undermine the legitimacy of democracies. Adversaries target media, political processes, financial networks, and personal data. The American public and private sectors must recognize this and work together to defend our way of life. But does that passage sound different to you than other comments that we have heard from the president about Russia?
Well, I agree with that passage, but I don't have any reason to believe that Donald Trump read that or actually has signed off on that, because everything he says is 180 degrees in the opposite direction. He actually acknowledged that when he saw Vladimir Putin at the Asia summit, that he took Putin at his word, that Putin was not responsible for the interference campaign, and that he thought it was insulting that we had to even keep raising it with Putin. So thank God that we have responsible generals and intelligence officers and FBI agents who care so much about our country to protect it from Russia and other actors who would meddle, but I don't believe that's because it's coming from the top.
Congressman, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Of course. My pleasure, Don.
When we come back, the president's son had more to say tonight, including pushing a Russia conspiracy theory. I'm going to ask the former director of the CIA what he thinks of that. Donald Trump Jr. slamming the ongoing Russia investigation tonight. I want to bring in now CNN national security analyst General Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA and the former director of the National Security Agency. Good to have you on, sir. Thank you so much. Good evening. Donald Trump Jr. just spoke to a group of conservative college students. Why don't you take a listen? This is a portion of what he had to say.
I'm glad that this is coming out now because it is good because real people have to see this. You know, my father talked about a rigged system throughout the campaign, and people are, oh, what are you talking about? But it is. And you're seeing it. There is, and there are, people at the highest levels of government that don't want to let America be America. They don't want to let the little guy have a voice.
People at the highest levels of government who don't want to let America be America. Does it sound to you like Donald Trump Jr. is pushing a conspiracy theory about America's government?
Well, Don, I have to confess to you, when I first heard that earlier this evening, that was a little scary. I mean, that is an appeal to the heart of autocracy and challenging the patriotism of those folks who work in the United States government. Look, we've got good institutions in this country. They're imperfect. They make mistakes. We have imperfect people who send messages they shouldn't send, but that in no way undercuts the legitimacy of these institutions. And we're now seeing a constant attack, not just from the administration, but as the congressman suggested just a few minutes ago, from other members of the Republican Party attacking the institutions of American government. And it's those institutions, Don, the rule of law, the processes that keep us a free people.
So why would the president's son say something like that?
Well, I mean, I don't know that Don Jr. has been marked by a cool, calm judgment in his public utterances in the past. But what it suggests to me is that in their heart of hearts, they don't think this investigation is going to a happy place, at least not a happy place from their point of view. And Don, I'm not predicting criminal indictments about collusion or anything like that. But I do think as the investigation goes on, we learn more and more about the synchronization of activities of the Trump campaign, including by the president's son, with WikiLeaks and the actions of the Russian Federation.
So you think it has that he may be concerned, anything to do with it, he may be concerned about the personal consequences for himself, his family, or his father?
Sure. And look, they're family. They have concerns for one another. That's human. That's understandable. But you need someone around this group who advises them, number one, this isn't wise on their behalf, and the collateral damage they're doing to American institutions, belief in the American government, the integrity of the American system. Don, my great fear, based upon that earlier quote, that we're going to do long-term damage to things on which we depend.
Our reliable institutions, the institutions that made America great to begin with. But it's interesting because I would imagine most people would say if their father was president of the United States, they would let the presidenting leave the presidenting up to their father. Yeah. And the comments as well, you're right, they would be wise to do that. The former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, joined CNN yesterday to talk about President Trump's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Here's what he had to say.
I think this past weekend is illustrative of what a great case officer Vladimir Putin is. He knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with the president.
So here's what Clapper went on to say, that he meant that he said a figurative way. But I'm curious what your reaction is to his comment.
No, I agree with Jim, particularly since he qualified it, saying he was speaking in a figurative sort of way. Look, Vladimir Putin's a case officer. Case officers attempt to influence other people. We've got this little tool we use that, how do you influence others? Money, ideology, compromise, ego. Putin will pull the lever that is most of use to him in all of his relationships. So it's not surprising he would try to do it with our president. And frankly, in this case, I think the one that stands out, the technique that seems most prominent, the one he appears to be most using, is appeal to ego.
I want to read something. This is Sally Yates, a former Attorney General of the United States, wrote in an op-ed to USA Today. She said, "Our shared values include another essential principle, and that's the rule of law, the promise that the law applies equally to everyone, that no person is above it, and that all are entitled to its protection. The rule of law requires a strict separation between the Justice Department and the White House on criminal cases and investigations. This wall of separation is what ensures the public can have confidence that the criminal process is not being used as a sword to go after one's political enemies or as a shield to protect those in power. It's what separates us from an autocracy." Are you concerned that our country could be moving away from the democracy that we were founded on?
Yeah, I've got a great deal of confidence in American political culture, the American people, and as already suggested, Don, American institutions. But Ms. Yates is pointing out something that's quite real. This attack, as I said before, on the institutions, the undercutting of the legitimacy of processes, imperfect as they may be, on which we all depend. And Don, in that article, she went on to talk about the critical role of truth in sustaining American democracy, and we see that under attack as well as our institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yates also went on to write that this is a moment for America to return to its core values. Do you agree with that, and what kind of effort will that take?
Don, I have spent more time reflecting and reading the Federalist Papers in the last 2 years than I have cumulatively over the last 50 years of my life. We're returning to basics, and my great hope is after this period, we emerge from this with a greater, deeper understanding and appreciation for what makes America, America, to refer to the quote from Don Jr. before.
Amen. So listen, we're almost a year into Trump's presidency. How are America's institutions holding up, you think?
Actually, pretty well. That sound you hear from Washington is actually the sound of American institutions pushing back, whether it's law enforcement, the courts, you guys in the press, American intelligence. Don, we've even had moments where we've got the NFL and the Boy Scouts of America pushing back.
Mm-hmm. Listen, the president reportedly expects to be exonerated from this whole investigation. And do you think that'll happen? And if he's not, what do you think will happen there?
Don, look, I have no insight into what Bob Mueller is doing and the details, the evidence that he is building. I'm certainly not a lawyer, but if you're asking me as a layman where this ends up, unfortunately, as I suggested earlier in our conversations, it probably ends up in an ambiguous place. We may see some indictments for peripheral activities, whether it's tax or money laundering or registering as an agent of a foreign power and so on. But on the core question of collusion, there may not be enough evidence to show any crime. And what we'll have is people who thought there was collusion going in will believe there's collusion going out. And people with a contrary view will have their view equally sustained and will be left in this netherworld without resolution.
Thank you, sir. It is always a pleasure.
Thank you.
When we come back, has the president made late night TV great again? Brian Stelter is here. He's going to break it down for us. You're likely not laughing at the White House, but President Trump's giving late-night TV comics a lot of material to work with. And fans, they can't seem to get enough. Senior media correspondent Brian Stelter takes a look.
Do you ever stop for a moment and think to yourself, it's only been 10 months? Yeah? Yeah? It's only been 10 months of Donald Trump.
And late-night comedians have been laughing all the way.
I wonder if he remembered his water this time. Did he have any water on? Someone tell him he can't drink water like that.
Every day, something new to mock.
That's how a baby drinks out of a sippy cup.
And some new way to shock.
Every day I wake up terrified at the notion that he's president of the most powerful nation in the world. But I must admit, every day I also wake up knowing he's going to make me laugh.
TV ratings usually dip after a presidential election, but not this year. Trump has made late night great again, as hosts like Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers channel the anti-Trump feelings of their fans.
Hopefully that will be a great, big, beautiful Christmas present.
I'm sorry, but the last person I want to get a Christmas present from is Donald Trump.
There are dozens of reasons why the president is stuck with a historically low approval rating. Is late night a contributing factor?
He's so unpopular, pretty soon it's just going to be Fox and Friend.
With Trump's approval in the mid-30s, Jimmy Kimmel thinks that still seems too high. But he knows Trump's base is still with him.
They don't care what he does. He would have to eat a bucket of Kentucky Fried Bald Eagle and wipe his mouth on the Confederate flag to go lower.
The 35% of Americans supporting Trump are probably not watching. But some of the 59% who disapprove are grateful that these comics are speaking out. Stephen Colbert has surged into first place, enjoying some of his highest ratings ever.
The real loser here is Donald Trump.
When Trump falters, when he falls, these shows rise. Yes, they joke around, but they tackle serious issues too, including healthcare policy.
Before 2014, if you were born with congenital heart disease like my son was, there was a good chance you'd never be able to get health insurance because you had a pre-existing condition.
Jimmy Kimmel's standout moment of the year, promoting healthcare access.
It shouldn't matter how much money you make. I think that's something that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else, we all agree on that.
Some conservatives denounced Kimmel for confusing the facts, and Trump has himself complained about the venom coming from late night, even musing at one point, should we get equal time? But so far, no pro-Trump show has emerged.
The war on Christmas is over. It will soon be replaced by the war with North Korea.
There's more to come next year, with Stephen Colbert producing an animated spoof, Our Cartoon President, for Showtime.
Our cartoon president, coming soon!
For now, 11 months in, the audience is cheering these comics on.
37 more months to go. Yeah. Or less. Hey, it could be less. Could be less. You never know.
And it could be more, as Brian just said before. Brian Stelter is here with me, along with Kieran Mayo, the former editor-in-chief of Ebony Magazine, and comedian John Fugelsang. When we come back, I want to ask all of you, was this a pivotal moment in late night? Tonight's show host Jimmy Fallon took a lot of heat for this moment. He was mussing Donald Trump's hair during the campaign. Lots of fans didn't find that funny, and TV host Steve Harvey got blowback for, remember this meeting with Trump during the transition? Brian Stelter's here, Kieran Mayo, and also, by the way, Kieran is a former editor-in-chief of Ebony Magazine, and comedian John Fugelsang, a Sirius XM radio host and the host of
Page 6 TV, Don.
Page 6 TV. Thank you all for joining us. So look, both of them, Brian, you first. Jimmy Fallon, Steve Harvey received a lot of backlash. Steve Harvey regretted that meeting. He said, meeting with Donald Trump was the worst mistake of my life. Why do you think they both face such animosity for this?
This cultural backlash to Donald Trump is like nothing we've ever seen before. The country is so polarized. People are forced to take sides. If you're an A-lister, if you're a comedian, if you're an entertainer, you know, even Taylor Swift has been criticized for not commenting on Donald Trump. Yeah. That's what a weird environment, a polarized environment we're in right now. Now, Fallon has tried to change his tune. He's become more critical of Trump. He's made more jokes about Trump. But the viewers have spoken. They've chosen Colbert and Kimmel over Fallon.
But Fallon was number one, right? And Kimmel and Colbert were like between 2 and 3. And
right,
now,
pre-Trump, Fallon,
now
Fallon was the lead. Now Colbert is firmly in first place and rising. He's head and shoulders above the rest.
And Kimmel's at 2, and then Fallon has slipped to 3. I noticed a Fallon promo during SNL, and I sat there with someone and watched and said, oh, he needs the help. But he has said he doesn't want to do that kind of comedy.
Well, he's begun being more political. I mean, Jimmy Fallon has done more political bits, not political in terms of taking on policy. They're making fun of Trump as a guy, but than he'd ever done before. But that said, Colbert had the advantage of being the progressive, satirical, political comic to begin with. So I think if Hillary Clinton had been elected, it would have gone a different way, ratings-wise. I think David Letterman would be winning that slot right now if he was still at CBS.
Why is that?
He had Trump on many times, and he hosted Trump a number of times on the show. He toyed with him like a cat and a mouse.
Much like Howard Stern.
Even more so, because Letterman played it to get laughs from a studio audience. Howard had to be deferential enough to get Donald to come back. I do think, though, that, Fallon mussing with Trump's hair, that was like that awkward moment when Jack Parr tugged on Che Guevara's goatee and was never seen on broadcast again. I'm making that up. But, I don't think that Fallon's ratings tumbled just because of that. I do think that had Hillary Clinton been elected, most likely there wouldn't be resistance in the air, and he would still be number one.
How do you think the numbers would be if Hillary Clinton was president?
I'm not sure. I just know that you don't get to tussle someone's hair and humanize them when they spend all of their day dehumanizing other folks. So I think there's a visceral and immediate reaction.
It was immediate, and it's interesting to watch the ratings go from there, and I think other late-night hosts realize it. realized it and took advantage of it. Certainly Colbert. Right?
You know, President Obama appeared on these late night shows. He was not a regular, but he appeared on the Tonight
got
Show.
criticized
He
for
appeared
it.
on others, and he was criticized, but it humanized him. People, I think a lot of people liked seeing the president in a more informal format. We're not seeing President Trump go on these shows. I know they would like to book him. Colbert would love to book President Trump, but they wouldn't do any hair tussling. They wouldn't play with him in that way.
And he'd never show up.
He'd never
Well,
show
and
up.
that's the bigger point, is that he won't do it. He won't do it.
Because remember when President Obama would slow jam the news, right?
That's exactly what I
And
mean.
then people would
Those were
criticize.
popular clips, but we don't see President Trump looking for those entertainment formats.
And that would actually might
there
help
is-
him, actually.
You're forgetting Fox and Friends, America's favorite entertainment morning show. God
You
bless
said it,
them.
John.
Yeah, well,
it really is an entertainment morning show. They don't consider themselves, by the way, part of the news division. Right?
No, they
Part of
consider them to opinion. A lot of folks do think of it as conservative entertainment.
Yeah, and that is often your counterpart on Fox News will say, well, this program and that program and that program is not considered news, but the people at home don't know the difference.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, to the layperson, news is news is news. You turn on your television, somebody's
Fox
sitting there
News,
with a tie, somebody's sitting there with their blonde do. You consider it.
And they're saying these people don't have to be accurate and factual because they're not part of the news division. Is that kind of what they're?
That's the suggestion.
That's the
Opinion
suggestion.
shows reign supreme.
That's what some
But
say.
I
But
think
there
that
are a
gets to
lot.
the
Of, there are a
point-
lot of real journalists who work there.
It gets to the point of the piece, though, that Trump's approval ratings, is it related not just to the news coverage on channels like this, not just to his lack of accomplishments on Capitol Hill, but also because of these late night shows. It's because people soak up information in such different ways now, whether it's a banner on the screen on Fox and Friends, or whether it's a joke on Kimball's show,
Or
I think
a
it
tweet.
partly explains his approval rating.
But Brian-
Popular culture.
I want to play this. I want to ask you this. 'Cause I want to bring up something else. Alec Baldwin did his usual portrayal of the president on this past weekend Saturday Night Live. He also referenced me and poked fun of Omarosa. Listen.
Now I can settle down and be super presidential. That is until Don Lemon says something mean about me and I tweet the actual N-word. Even worse, it's Omarosa. Someone turn off the lights.
Too late, I see you in there, Donald. Nobody kicks Omarosa out the White House. Hey, get away from the window right now.
Let's go. She's a tough cookie. I think we're going to have to move.
Can I ask you, what is it about Omarosa that seems to incite such strong feelings for so many?
For black women, I just came from the conference of all black women ever. Republicans, Democratic, Independent, April Ryan, everybody. We're ready to trade Omarosa. I mean, just the bottom line is that she represents no one but herself at all times, and she doesn't do that well. I don't know if anyone has seen this YouTube tape of her recently.
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, just the level of ridiculousness and the fact that we've been forced to entertain her as an entity as something serious. It just doesn't jibe with anyone's common sense. I think that's what I'm representing right now. Folks' good common sense says no to Omarosa.
But she's universally disliked. You're speaking of just black women.
I'm talking universally.
She's universally, even among not
Well,
just
that's why
black
she's famous. I mean, she became so famous
She's
for
a
being
villain.
disliked as an apprentice candidate that she got to be on Celebrity Apprentice. She was that disliked. She qualified as celebrity.
So can
And
she
I'm-
get a new show now? I wonder.
I'm sure she will. I don't think it'll last.
Maybe that's
because-
what Robin Roberts was.
Yeah, I don't think it would last, though. I don't think that she has the ability to anchor a show. I'm honored that someone I've sat next to on the Wendy Williams show got a White House email address, but I do think that the petulance that made her famous is what ultimately made her useless to this administration.
She brought up something really important. though,
Wait,
lack
hold
of
on. How you
diversity
doing?
in
You're not saying anything bad about Wendy, right? We love Wendy.
I got nothing but love for Wendy. And Omarosa was always very nice to me as well, but she became famous for bad behavior.
Absolutely.
She became famous for being...
She prides herself in the villain character.
Here's what I found
Owned
interesting.
it.
There was a point when people like me and people like you would only be seen in a clip on the Daily Show to criticize something about what the news was.
Yeah, you weren't getting talked about on SNL.
And SNL, but now we're being used to criticize the administration on late night TV. Maybe if you were, you had a project or a book, or there was some big story like Katrina. But now it just seems every night I never know which show I'm going to show up on. Sometimes I choke on my own popcorn, like, whoa, there was another reference.
Right, and it's because these shows, they are taking the news seriously and then making fun of it. They are acknowledging what's going on in the world, quoting from the CNNs of the world, and then adding this usually anti-Trump twist. That is what's so appealing.
You're right, but it's important to remember that that clip of Kimmel is correct. He's not going to lose the base. The base isn't watching Seth Meyers or Bill Maher. The base would not abandon him unless maybe he did a Black Lives Matter march and married Lena Dunham at the end. The base is immune to the barbs of late-night comics. It took 6 years before George W. Bush's popularity took a hit with the base from late-night comics. I think it's rather impressive that with this 30%, seeing how long and devotedly this 30% holds.
I'd still like to watch a pro-Trump comedy show.
Yeah, I think you guys
You couldn't
missed
do it.
the fact